Hi folks, welcome to the Unreal Engine Learning Theatre at GDC 2023. I am Samuel Bass. I'm an evangelist and content developer here at Epic Games, and prior to that I was a game designer for about 9 million years. And today I'm here to talk to you about making games in Fortnite. Now, if you caught the State of Unreal yesterday, you might have a sense of what that is. If not, you might be going, making games in Fortnite. Sam, what are you talking about? Well, what I'm talking about is making games in the Unreal Editor for Fortnite, or UEFN for short. So, if you don't know what that is, we'll get into it and explain it. If you do, we're going to go into some depth. But either way, we're going to talk about what UEFN is, how it works, and how you can make games in it. All right, let's get into it. So, ultimately, UEFN is a combination of the power and flexibility of the Unreal Editor. So, if you've used Unreal before, you probably know our editor UI UX. That's all there. A lot of our tooling, things like sequencer, our data import pipeline, the modeling tools. I'll be showing off a bunch of that stuff once we get to the editor. We combine that with the tooling and an enormous library of content you can find in Fortnite Creative. So, as a dev, you may be less familiar with Fortnite Creative, so if you bear with me for a sec, I'm going to talk about it. Fortnite Creative is ultimately a mode in Fortnite that gives our players access to all the same content we use to build the game itself and lets them make their own experiences. And the key thing here is that this is not just multiplayer, it's multi-user, meaning you can play the games with your friends, but you can also build the game with your friends. And then, when you're done doing the multi-user editing, you hit a button, and it's available to literally anyone who can play Fortnite and anything, from an Android phone, Nintendo Switch, PS5. Your little game is there, or even your big game. And so, we've taken that, we've combined that with the Unreal Editor, and we put a bunch of special cool stuff on top, and that's UEFN. So let's get into the actual demo. First part is going to be me and the editor showing workflow, how easy it is to build content, all of that kind of fun stuff, some cool tricks, some neat stuff. And part two, we're going to go a bit deeper. We're going to take a look at the space inside, which is one of the showcase projects we shipped with UEFN, built by Epic staff to really put it through its paces. So this is a single-player, visually gritty adventure game with no combat. It is about as different to Fortnite as you can get and still be a thing that exists within the context of Fortnite. So, let's go into the editor and see what happens. Alright, here we are in UEFN itself. First thing to note, we have got a lot of Unreal in here. We have volumetric clouds, we have nanite geometry in the distance, we have landscape system, water system, and also some pretty fancy post-processing. The other thing we have is Fortnite assets. So key thing with Fortnite assets is they have a lot of inherent functionality. They snap to the Fortnite build grid, which means it's very easy to spin up whatever structure you need really quickly, especially if you're prototyping out of space. That's walls, floors, ceilings. We got tons of different stuff to play with. This palm tree is also a Fortnite palm tree. We have a lot of foliage. We got some fun shaders to paint the terrain with, all that kind of stuff. However, I am just stuck here on this desert island, and I would like to not be stuck here on this desert island. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the Unreal tools, Sequencer, to escape. So to do that, here I am in Sequencer. If you have used Unreal, you should probably know Sequencer pretty well. It's used for animation, for cinematics. It is a really deep toolkit. And in this case, I'm using it to bring in, well, a flying saucer to come rescue me from my desert island. So that's all very well and good, but it's not exactly the coolest looking flying saucer now. So let's do a little thing to get me a cooler flying saucer. Now, as I said, I am a game designer. I am not an artist. So what I'm going to do is I am going to use Fab. So again, if you watch the State of Unreal, you probably have a sense of what Fab is. Fab is our new emporium of content, models, materials, all the Quixel stuff. There's just a ton of stuff in here. So I scroll through showing you a ton of stuff. And the idea is that when you want to start building out your game, all these assets are here. It's only going to grow. It's only going to get bigger. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to my purchases, because I'm a smart guy, and I bought this satellite dish. So if you look at it in 3D, which you can do in Fab, it's pretty nice. You can see it's not a UFO, but with a little tweaking, I could definitely turn it into one. So there are two ways to add an asset to your UEFN project. The first is as a referenced asset, which means that as the artist updates it on Fab, you will get those updates dynamically in your project. There is also as a modifiable Unreal Engine asset. And that means that I get the meshes, the materials, all of that, and I can do with what I want. And I'm going to do some terrible things to this poor satellite dish. So that's what I'm grabbing. And that's it. Simple as that. It is now. Huge satellite dish exists in my UEFN project. So let's just drop that on top of the UFO. And you can see it's not quite UFO yet. So what I'm going to do is use our modeling tools. Let me drop down a little bit so I have a nicer angle. I'm going to use our modeling tools to turn it into the UFO I want. The modeling tools shipped with Unreal 5 and are a full 3D modeling solution in terms of not just modeling, UVs, simplification, all that kind of stuff. Worth noting that they are destructive tools, so if you're modifying a mesh, it's actually modifying the mesh. If you want to do multiple variants, duplicate your mesh first. It'll make your life easier. In this case, I have it on fab. I can just grab it again if I do something terribly wrong. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a plane cut, which, as it might imply, cuts off all the polys above a certain plane, to turn this satellite dish into a UFO by getting rid of its satellite-y bits. As you can see, this is a nice, efficient asset, so it edits very quickly. Let's see, let's get rid of that bit too. That looks better. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over so it looks more like a UFO, and then I'm going to adjust its pivot, because if you've ever imported a model into any 3D package ever and the pivot is off, you know how annoying that is. Modeling tools, I can just fix the pivot. So here is my pivot. I'm going to move that along. Move that along. I'm going to go to top-down view and make sure it is properly aligned, but we should be good to go. So here is my pivot. Yeah, not properly aligned because 3D is hard. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to bake my pivot, drop it in there a little bit. Once that's done, I have to do the next thing, which is this UFO is tiny. I want it to be big, so I'm going to bake the transform, which is literally modifying the transform of a thing. Its scale, its location, its rotation, and then baking it in. So I'm scaling it up to 3, baking that in. That is now its default 1 scale. I can now delete this mesh and just replace that with that. So it doesn't look very shiny and UFO-y though, does it? So I'm going to create a material to stick on it. However, I'm going to do that slightly differently. So I am using the Unreal Material editor, which you, again, should be pretty familiar with if you've used Unreal. If not, it is a fully complete material editor solution. But I am not a tech artist any more than I am a 3D modeler. So I am going to grab it from the Unreal developer community. The Epic developer community, rather. The Unreal part of it, there is. So, Epic developer community is online. It's where all our tutorials, instructions, all that kind of stuff live. It is also home to portfolios, profiles. You can show off your work, make your own tutorials. And the snippet library, which is where you can find bits of code, blueprint, shader graph, whatever you want, and paste them directly into your project. So I've got this nice shader graph here. I am now going to get rid of that. And all I have to do, paste it in. Suddenly, I hook up the bits, or I try to, and then miss. And you get a really fancy shader. So now, nice shiny metal shader. Close that out. Let's drop that on my UFO. So the next thing I want to do is this UFO has some Niagara assets that I imported from an Unreal 5 project that I built. So you can take things from a UE5 project, bring them into UEFN. In some cases, it may not let you upload them if they don't fit our asset standards. But yeah, I just built a little Niagara thing, moved it over. Here we are. So now let's go back to the island. Let's look at our sequence. I don't need to be in modeling mode anymore. And see how it looks with the new thing. I'm also going to turn on some stuff because give us a little bit of drama. Everybody likes a little bit of drama. Okay, so now when the UFO comes in, we've got some more Niagara effects. It warps in. There's a little bit of lumen lighting when it warps in. It's spinning in, it's dropping in, and the catwalk is extending to meet it because you can also animate all of those beautiful Fortnite assets. And it's here to rescue me. However, at this point, you're probably going, that's great, Sam, but we're in the editor. This is not a game. This is in the editor. So how do you get it into the Fortnite client? Well, that's what this launch session button is for. However, in the interests of time and respecting conference internet, I'm going to show you what that is on a slide and then talk you through how all of that works. There will be video. Please bear with me. So, when you launch into the client and run the game, this is what you will see. Here I am, I'm Toon Peely. One of the reasons I'm Toon Peely is to show that we have the full rendering engine going. So, this is a non-PBR character and a PBR environment. We've got lumen lighting going, we've got the guy coming in, and the thing to note is that all these Fortnite assets maintain all their functionality when I animate them. So they still have collision, they're still destructible, all of that. And that's nice, but you may wonder, how did I get it on the client? What actually happened? So what that is one-button deployment, which means I click on that launch session button. It says, are you sure this is the map you want to deploy? I say yes. And then it uploads it, it validates your assets, it packages it up, and it distributes it. So validation means that we want to make sure that your assets hit our standards, and also that you're not uploading like 8 gigabytes of textures for people to download. We want to keep it relatively tight. So here I am, you hit start, and there we are, right in the game, right where we left off. So at that point, you are in the client. You are available on literally every Fortnite platform. I could be playing this on Switch right now. It would look a little different, but it would be the exact same experience. The other thing is it's inherently multiplayer, which means if I had 4-player starts in this, I could have 4 players, they would all see the same thing. Once your client is up, you can also live edit, which I love. So here is me trolling myself by live editing my own project. I am dropping an island, a big prefab building onto my island, and then I'm messing with the water tower in my editor to be petty. You can see this is updating in real time. And then I'm also destroying stuff and going, hey, why did you destroy my stuff? So obviously this is a pretty simple demo, but this is all updating in real time across the network. And you can have multiple users to do full live collaboration. It's pretty awesome. The other thing worth noting here is that certain aspects don't update live. And for that, the launch session button becomes a button that says push changes. You hit that, you don't have to go through the whole running the client thing. Once the client's up, it's up, you just use it. And it'll push those changes, restart the island, and you go from there. All right, so now we're going to jump back to the editor, because there is a ton of stuff I didn't tell you about yet. And that was deliberate, I swear. So, one of the things you noticed is that when I start my experience, you're in a lobby. And that is because, as I said, this is an inherently multiplayer experience, even if you create it as single player. Which means it has pre-game, when you spawn in, it has game, and post-game. And what I've done is I've used some devices, which are the building blocks of the Creative Suite, UEFN, Fortnite Creative, and so on, to build out a little lobby for myself. A device is a fully replicated, configurable, fully debugged thing that we produce so you can use as building blocks for your content. And in this case, what I have is a player spawn. That happens right at the start. It's in the pre-game phase when players spawn in. Same with the barrier. The barrier spawns in at the beginning. I've told it to never go away unless I tell it to. This is a barrier device. It doesn't have to look like this. I just like the material it uses. And finally, a timer. The timer activates on the gameplay phase start. Counts down 5 seconds. And then if I click back on my barrier, you'll see its disable function is triggered by the timer succeeding. That's because devices send out events saying, I've done this, and you can sync those events to other devices to create chains of logic that work cleanly across the network and allow you to create pretty interesting chains of logic. That same device, the same timer, is also activating this. This is my cinematic sequence device. What that does is play my cinematic sequence across the network so all players see it simultaneously. So if you wanted to create a multiplayer platform game and animate a bunch of platforms in sequencer, that would work. You just put them in that device. So now I'm going to hide my barrier and show you some stuff. These are 2 really, really important devices. The first, I'm going to drag this out a little bit so you can see the names, is the experience settings device. This is at the very core of your UEFN experience. What it does is define your game mode. If you've worked in Unreal at all, you've probably worked with game mode, game instance, all of that stuff, gameplay framework. This lets you define all your game mode settings, how voice chat works, how many players you have, how people spawn in, how the phases work, all the way through to things like traversal options. Do you want parkour? Do you want destructible environments? How do you want what time of day do you want? Do you want to create your own dynamic weather system? All of those things. It's all in there. I'm going to do a high-speed scroll so you can see how deep it goes. And I'm not going to explain any of that to you because, well, we have limited time. The other one is the HUD controller device, because I'm sure if you watched my video, you might have noticed that I have no UI in my experience. That's because I told it to hide the UI with the HUD controller. The HUD controller is hypergranular. And what that means is you can turn on or off the bits you want when you want them. So if you want a bit later, oh, now I want the minimap, now I want the inventory. You can turn that on with an event and go from there. And that allows you to create pretty much the experience you want. So what I've shown you is basically an intro sequence to a thing, which is all well and good, but you can go a lot deeper than that. And for that, I am going to talk about the space inside. So the space inside is one of our showcase projects that shipped with UEFN. It's built by Epic staff. Initially, one of our main artists, Victor Ullman, who worked on the really cool Opal demo, and is a single-player, visually gritty adventure game. And here is me playing it. So I spawned in as Skelly, and I am locked in a room. I pick up some keys. Are those keys there? They are. I pick them up. I go back to the door. Notice all that lumen lighting, the custom processing. These are Quixel assets, a bit of the fab, a little bit of the modeling tools. Isn't that pretty? Looks super nice. You run outside, the light goes out, and cut to black because you can go play it over there and see what happens next. So the space inside is a full, complete thing that you can play. So I'm going to show you how they built it. It is really designed to show how far you can take UEFN. So here I am in the space inside. Just to reiterate, like these assets are either from Fab, modeled with the modeling tools, or, built by Victor himself elsewhere and imported. And then because we have the full data import pipeline, and then textured with either custom materials or Quixel materials. So it gives it this very dense, visually gritty look. It's also using a lot of custom post-processing, because you do not have to use Fortnite post-processing. You can use the post-processing you want. So here I am in this nice dark room. Let's turn the lights on and talk about how that locked door puzzle worked. I'm going to do the simplest example first and then go from there. So that locked door is really a tale of two buttons. A button device is kind of what it sounds like. It doesn't actually have to be a visual button. It's an interactive thing you go up to, you interact with, and it does something. And in this case, we have two buttons. One that says use key to open door, and one that says take key. The start of the game, when gameplay begins, the use key button is disabled. The pick up key button is not. And I think you might tell where I'm going here. So if I go over to the keys, which are right over here, the keys are just a static mesh. When you hit that button, we make the static mesh go away, we have a bunch of visual feedback, and we activate the open door button. So you're not really picking up a key, you are just activating a button. If you've done any game development, this is pretty simple gameplay logic, and here's how you string it together in UEFN. It's just a matter of connecting the button activated event to enable the other button. But you can go a bit deeper than that. It doesn't have to be that simple. So you may remember the flashlight. So the flashlight is spawned by this button, and is this thing. This is a full-on inventory device, and you may notice that we are using the Fortnite inventory here. This is an adventure game. You pick up items, you use them. Consequently, we need to be able to let you do that. So we use the HUD controller to enable the inventory. And now, once you have the flashlight, one thing you might not have noticed is when you shine it at the keys, they glimmer. The trick there is we are using this, which is a player perception trigger. What that does is know when you're looking at a thing. However, what if you're looking at a thing and you don't have a flashlight? We don't want the glimmer, right? So what we do is we use a device called a conditional, which again is a pretty common engineering term. What it is a device that activates when conditions have been met. Those conditions, you have the flashlight and you're using it. Thus, if you're looking at the thing and using the flashlight, it activates the Niagara VFX and gives you the ability to create that shimmer. So you can create that more complex, layered experience where you are branching based on what the user's doing and how they're playing. Once you have the key, you can go out this door, and you may notice the light shadowed. That's because the player hit a trigger device that turned off a dynamic light, triggered some VFX, and the game continues from there. But you might be looking at me and going, that's all well and good, but these are all pre-built devices. What if I want to make my own stuff? Not everything has to be pre-built assets, pre-built devices. So what I'm going to do is hop down to this really fancy sci-fi corridor we got here and talk about how it was built, this was made entirely in the Unreal Engine modeling tools. When you saw me do horrible things to that satellite dish, same tools, only built by someone with artistic talent. So what he did is he built this corridor. It's a series of static meshes built with the modeling tools. He built the materials in the material editor, that applied some custom post-processing, and used Lumen to light it, and then suddenly you got this, which looks, honestly, you could ship this in a game. It looks amazing. But I am not going to do that. I'm going to go outside to an alleyway, because I'm a game designer, and I like hanging out in dark alleyways making gameplay. So what we're going to do is talk about what I built out here. This is a bit that was not in the space inside that I added to the game. So what we have here is what I like to think of as a collectible item puzzle. And I'm using a bunch of devices here. There's the item spawner devices. There is a trigger device to activate the puzzle, and a cinematic sequence device to open the door, to unlock the door once I've collected all of the items. The idea being, pick up X amount of items, and I will let you out of this space. However, there is no collectible item puzzle device, despite me clicking on this thing that says it is a collectible puzzle device. How did that happen? Well, I wrote it in verse. So it's as simple as that. This is a verse device, and I created it. So let's talk about verse a bit. All right, verse is our new programming language that comes with UEFN. It is designed to be simple to pick up and use. I am not an engineer, I'm a designer, I'm a scripter. I found it pretty simple to write that own device myself. It is general, it is designed for multiple solutions. It's not like it's a one-size-fits-all language. It's not it's only specifically for this. It is productive. It is designed to be used now. We're going to expand it, we're going to grow it, but it already works, you can use it, and it is also server-side within the context of UEFN, which means it handles all your replication for you. So you don't have to worry about replicating your verse script. Verse will do it for you. It's the same thing with the rest of UEFN. We don't want you to worry about multiplayer. We'll worry about multiplayer. You make the game that you want. And then the final part is that it's performant, because we want it to be used in open-world multiplayer games. We need to eat the least amount of cycles possible. Verse is good for that. So let's talk about the device I built. So on the right, you see a bunch of script. It's about 80 lines. I will walk you through it, don't worry. But first, let's talk about my design. My design is this. I created a verse markup tag. If you've used Unreal, a tag is how you say, this bunch of items are all something that I want to be able to gather as a group. So in this case, I have tagged my collectible item spawners. I spawn items from the tag devices. I track their status. When you got them all, I let you out, and I let you know how you're doing while you do it. For that, I need my trigger, my cinematic sequence, and my head message device that I need to be able to reference so it can fit into the specific area I'm using it, because I've built a generalized systemic solution to the problem. So let's look at the verse script. Don't worry, I'm going to go into great detail and zoom in on all of this, but this is 80 lines of verse. First up is libraries. If it's how I add the things I need from this specific verse script. The key one here is I added the simulation tags library, which means I can create my own tag. Next up, I define and make my definitions on my variables and my soft reference inputs for things like the trigger device. That bit there with the pink is all it takes to track the collectibles. And this in the green is all I need to evaluate to see if you completed the objective. All right, let's go through these real fast. So, collectible item puzzle. That is a tag. And so what I've done is I've defined a verse tag in verse. When I compile my verse in the UEFN editor, next time I want to put a tag on a thing using a verse markup tag component, my tag appears right there. So it is as simple as that. You don't have to compile separately. You can do it right in editor. Next, I'm defining variables, which is about as unexciting as you imagine, but there are a few things to talk about. One, verse is an immutable language by default, which means things are not changeable unless you tell it specifically, this is a variable I want to change. Which is why it says var before the variable name. If I left off the var, it would be a constant, it would not be changeable, it would be processed differently. It's also a strongly typed language, which is why my variables are defined as integers or logic booleans right up front. So that's defining variables. Here's my soft referenced inputs. Those are the things that you hook up in the editor to say, this is the trigger I want, this is the cinematic device I want, this is the HUD message device I want. All that is giving it a name and telling it what device you want to use and saying editable, and it will appear in UEFN when you click on your device as a thing that you can use a picker to select from. And then finally, I have my UI messages. Now, this doesn't sound that exciting, but I'm extending UEFN functionality with this. The HUD message device, by default, it displays a string or it doesn't. That's literally all it can do. The string can't have numbers in it. It's not dynamic. There's none of that. What I have done is defined 3 different strings, all of which you may notice are tagged to be localized, and they have all have integers in them, so I'm showing variables, and I'm running all three strings through one HUD message device, because you can use verse to extend functionality very simply. So let's talk about tracking the collectibles. This is pretty self-explanatory. I get an array of all my devices with my collectible item puzzle tag, and then I get the length of that array. An array is a list of things, and that tells me how many objects I need to pick up to solve the puzzle, which means that you can have as many or as little as you want, and it will adapt to your design. Then I do some subscriptions. Now, a subscription might take a little bit of explanation. You may notice earlier in the thing I was talking about how things send out events. Like you hit a trigger, it says, I've been triggered, and it sends out an event. I can subscribe to that event from a specific item or a specific actor, and then call a function from it. So in this case, when you hit my puzzle trigger, I call my setup puzzle thing, which it's a function that gives you instructions and spawns the things you're meant to pick up. For a more complex example of that, let's look at my item spawners. There, because it's an array, I'm doing a for loop to go through the entire array. And because it's an array of creative devices, which is the base object, I am then casting it to the item spawner device, so I can then subscribe to one of that device's events, which is item picked up. When an item is picked up, it will call my item collected function. My item collected function, right here. And this is even simpler. All it does is increment a variable, starting at 0. If that variable is now higher or equal to the total items I need, then I play the cinematic that lets you out of the room. I tell you that you've won, and I clean up my stuff so I'm not leaving anything dangling around. And if you haven't done it, I tell you how many more you have to collect, and I tell you to get back to it. It's as simple as that. So let's watch that in action. So here we are in the client. And here's me in a cool Plague Doctor outfit, just to show off some of our fancy PBR lighting. And I run out, I hit my trigger, and you can see the items spawning in. You can see the HUD message displaying. You do not see my verse device, because that is not visible to the player. As I click the items, the HUD device is telling me how I'm doing. I got all four found. Trigger the cinematic, and done. So I'm going to leave that running in a loop for a sec while I talk, if you forgive me talking a little bit. So what I've shown you is from the very simple to relatively complex. You can use UEFN to build all kinds of gameplay. It doesn't have to be a game. It can be an experience. It can be a concert. It could be a fun place to hang out with your friends. It could be a completely systemized game device that you use to build complex gameplay, like my little collectible puzzle. It can be anywhere in between. And we have Fab, we have this huge library of assets, we have the Epic developer community with all of its resources, and UEFN is on the EDC with snippets and documentation. And from my point of view, there are just a bazillion possibilities. There's so much you can do with it. I cannot wait to see what you folks do with it. My name is Samuel Bass. I'm an Epic Games Evangelist. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the Epic developer community.